Hello and welcome to another WeAreDevelopers Live. This is a special edition because we got technical issues all over the place, so hopefully something will come out of it. The other issue is that Dan is sick today, so do well. You can work more later on, it's fine. So we shouldn't be too worried about that. So today I've got somebody in here that I grabbed the last 2 days at an event. I was just in Düsseldorf in Germany at the WeAreDevelopers, not WeAreDevelopers, what am I talking about? Beyond Tellerrand conference, which is by my great friend Mark Thiele, one of the best conferences I know. I've been in every single edition so far. I was the first speaker at that one. And it's a super creative event, and that's what I really liked about it. So as I hadn't planned for a guest today in time, so I just grabbed one of the other speakers randomly and said we're going to talk with him today. He's in the same hotel that I was in, so hopefully the connection will be fine. But without further ado, let's try to get him on stage. Jason, how are you doing?
Good. How are you doing, Chris?
I thought we'd make it confusing and put like two ginger people with a beard on stage and basically see if you can guess the difference between the two of them. One of them is American, the other one is German, and Jason is basically an expert in responsive typography on the web and typography in general. So you could say you're a font of knowledge when it comes to typography, right?
I guess that's one type of way you'd say it.
Yeah, I thought about making jokes about typography, but most of them are unjustified and they're not leading anywhere. Seeing what you're doing, let's take a look at what you are about. Like, let's put here on stage. So, Jason, can you give us a bit overview what you do and what kind of expertise people pay you for?
Well, at the moment, I work for an e-commerce company, and I'm the principal designer on our design system team. So I've been working either for myself or a small consultancy prior to that. I've been doing this for about 30 years. About half of it has been focused really on web typography. And then later, as design systems kind of evolved, I got very much sort of tied into that world because it's not that easy to find people to pay you to be a web typographer.
It's weird, isn't it? Like, it's a thing that we've been struggling with. Like in the past, we didn't know. I remember back in the days we couldn't even use different fonts than the ones that were on a machine. That's how it started. So we did like font replacement techniques with Flash and like background images and all kind of stuff. And every time you talk about typography, there's two things coming in on the web, which is performance, like people loading far too many fonts, and of course accessibility as well, legibility, allowing people to resize the font to their needs rather than just being able to have granular control over these things.
Yeah.
How do you, as a person with an eye for design, actually deal with these challenges? Is it something that you take serious, or is it something that you're like, oh, please stop bothering me with that?
No, I think it's really serious. One of my favorite quotes from Tim Brown in his book Flexible Typesetting was that we no longer specify typography, we suggest it, and I think that's really important. As designers, we need to be really in tune with how to create a system that works regardless of some of those specifics. So if the font loads, great. If it doesn't, we should have thought about that. We should have thought about what is the fallback font that's going to load. We need to design in a way that if that text resizes, that it's still going to be useful, that it's not going to overrun the size of the product card or overlap with buttons. And we've seen all of those things happen. And I do know that I think something like 36% of our iOS users have their text set to a larger size than default. I mean, that's massive. Um, and and so, especially with an aging population, I've got my progressive lenses on in my glasses. Um, we need that. And so our systems need to survive that, and they need to be able to be um, stretched a bit so that if somebody needs to have the type bigger, they can do that. And then our job is to sort of provide those sensible defaults that will help it make sense as it scales. So the line height has to grow with the font size, and things need to wrap well. And with variable fonts, I know I'm kind of going off on a rant, but variable fonts would actually let us do even more. So I'm using a variable font in my website that you've got up on the screen. And when you put it in dark mode and make the font weight slightly heavier, I'm sorry, slightly lighter. And what that does is visually it reduces the weight of the light text on a dark background, and it preserves that legibility that you'd have with the opposite contrast. Because that's just a trick the eyes play, is that when you do reverse it, it will sort of gain weight this way. And so that's the balance. We have to think about how things get used, and try and anticipate that using the tools that we have. In this case, it's a media query, so it's relatively easy for us to do that with the variable font, lower the weight by maybe 30 or 40, instead of a full step with a different font file, and maintain that legibility.
You're using a gray outline on these orange things? Because it looked to me like it was just really doing anti-aliasing, but I don't know what is going on there, because that looks a bit blurry on my machine.
Yeah, I'm trying to take a look at what's going on. It's honestly been a while that I've been working for Chewy, so I haven't gone back and looked at this. And I think that is looks like a text shadow that's probably an artifact from me looking at it in light mode mostly.
Yeah, looks like it. That's interesting. Yeah, there's a text shadow outline thingy, and yeah, it's great what we can do with these things. But as you said, like the overlap, the font, if something goes on, that your card still works. I think it's amazing how much CSS gives us features right now to do that. Like we got Vmax, we got Vmin, we got like clamp, all kind of stuff. And you have got a few articles there talking about this, like how to use clamp and how to do these different things. So there's lots of stuff to read on you in this one. You also keep banging on about your dog. What's going on there?
Well, we have two. That is that the picture on screen there is Tilly. She unfortunately passed away a few years ago. Um, but we have two younger collies now, Leo and Henry. They're both rough collies, and I post a lot of pictures of them on Instagram, and they're really cute, fluffy dogs. So they're a lot of fun.
That's what I mean. It's a misnomer. They're not rough. They're more like fluffy. You should give them an eye patch or a flick knife or something to make them look rougher.
Yeah, honestly, they're the least rough dogs that you could imagine. But I guess it's by comparison. There's a variety of the breed that has a very flat, smooth coat, which is where the rough part comes in. Bit of a misnomer, really.
That's true. It's interesting. I want to quickly go on a tangent as well, because I want to talk a bit about an article we just published and I had published in print as well, which you had some good ideas as well, because your talk that you gave yesterday, the conference, was about like staying curious and learning things and challenging yourself to do things that you hadn't done before. And I found lately that with the AI world that we're in, we're taking more and more shortcuts. Like people just basically create something with AI and then put it on social media and want applause for it and get applause for it. But it feels so hollow to me. Like the whole article that I've written here, and it's also on in a print magazine at the moment, is all about like the Studio Ghibli thing, that how everybody has created these images now, and now everybody has an action figure on LinkedIn thing as well. And it feels like the joy of learning something new and being bad at it and getting better at it, we take that away from us if we just take that shortcut the whole time. So do you think that that is it currently a hype that everybody just creates lots of stuff, puts it on social media, and doesn't put the effort into learning things any longer? Or is it something that you think people will get tired of really quickly as well, and then start doing proper things again?
I do think people will get tired of it. I mean, this is uh, they're gimmicks. I think, and anytime you can press a button and make something that looks just like something else, uh, it's a fad that I think will pass. I mean, I think those tools will get better at doing other things, and there will be other fads and other things that will eventually be really useful. But um, but I think that they're largely at the stage of being pattern recognition engines more than they are really something that is applying judgment. And that's the thing that I love about, I mean, the focus of the talk that I gave was about curiosity and its role either in design or, I mean, you could development, same principles. Is there's judgment, there's intuition, and there's that those mental leaps that we make as creative makers of one kind or another, more technical or more artistic, doesn't matter. Um, and those things don't go away. Our like fooling around with code, it was um, I don't know, it's just messing around with things that weren't working led me down a path that had my first articles published for Monotype and led to talks, led to writing a book, led to um, being on stage a bunch of times and being here. And I don't honestly think it would have mattered if it was starting now or starting then. There are still things that happen that we see as we interact with the world, that we get an idea and we go make something, and that will still have value. I really do believe that.
The thing is, like, keep your patience. Like, if it's not immediate a success, that's fine. Like, just suck, be really bad at something for month and month at a time, and just get better gradually. And like, it feels to me like this, like happiness machine that is supposed to be social media, with like people throwing likes at you and people for not throwing likes at you. There's such a short span between like euphoria and depression in these things right now. It's really bad. And in the article, I also talked about music industry, where in the 90s we had like or the 2000s we had like boy bands and girl bands, which were like marketing constructs. Like they
Mhm.
came out of market research rather than being a band. There was one for every flavor in that. There was like the bad guy in, or the bad boy in the boy band, and there was the romantic one, and
Yeah,
these kind of things. And breaking out of that one, there's hardly anybody who had a career afterwards as their personality, because they weren't allowed to show it there. And
right.
pandering to a current design trend feels to me the same. Like, find your voice, find your creativity,
Yeah.
rather than just like trying to be the best at vibe coding at the moment. I can't hear this term any longer. It's
Yeah, I agree. I think there's uh, at present, I think maybe there are more actually useful tools for coding with AI than there are on the design side. I mean, on the design side, it's really just about making images. It's not really doing something interesting yet in any kind of UI design, other than making UIs that look like something else. So if I want my UI to be packaged in a blister pack, that looks like it came with the toy store and the doll on the side, then sure, we can do that. But um, it's not what I want on my website. So I guess I don't know. Just have to wait and see. But yeah, I like the idea of just sucking at something until I get better at it, and it's that process that helps me figure out what is it that I want to get better at, and how do I feel about it? What is my take on good typography or bad? Um,
mm,
I've had plenty of experiences of believing in something, getting up on stage at a type conference and getting yelled at afterwards by a type designer because they think I'm doing it wrong. And that's fine. It might not be to their standard. It might not be to what they want the world to be. Um, but I also look at screens and design for them way more than they do. And maybe it's not their technique, maybe it's not what we do in print, but actually on screens, I know this works better. And I'll
mm.
take something from that and I'll learn. But but I believe in all the time that I put in being bad at stuff on screens that I've gotten pretty good at it.
It was interesting, like in the beginning of web design, we mimicked print design a lot, and we didn't have the technologies to do it. I remember I think the New York Times was the first one to do like a multi-column layout using JavaScript to read out the amount of words and then putting it into a table and these kind of things. Nowadays, we've got CSS Grid, we got Flexbox, we got all these cool new things coming up. But it still feels like sometimes print is like the cool design thing that people go for, and we try to emulate it in an environment that's completely beyond our control. I always define web design as the end user is in control of your website. They can do whatever they would need to do with it to make it readable or understandable to them.
Yep.
And your stuff has to be robust enough to actually deal with that. But we always go back to this, like, but wouldn't it be great if it's like 24 pixels and only 3 words per button kind of thing? It's tricky to convey that to people, that seeing that there's such a wealth of information in typography and in print design that we for decades talked about. So it feels like as a web developer, you go in and it's like, throw this out the window, do something else. Is there a middle ground somewhere? Like, or do you think the new technologies that we have in CSS helps print designers embrace that more as well?
They could. They'll only do it if those designers actually start to understand what's possible. And that's, that's where you get into the, should designers code? And that's like asking if, fish need water. I mean, it's an insane question that I still have to struggle with people all the time. If you don't, I don't mean write production code. I don't ever really want to be building React applications, I'll be honest. But I know what HTML and CSS can do. I know what Grid can do. Um, I know a lot of the spec around typography and its support, and those details make the difference. That is what helps me make an interesting design that might evoke things from the web, but it's not. Evoke things from print, but there's things that are different. So 65 to 70 characters per line for line length is something that's been sort of a standard in print design for a long time. But there's context, and there's people getting used to reading longer lines of text, and so it's different on a screen. 75 or 80 characters is pretty normal, and there's, so it is about taking the idea of when the line of text gets too long for your eye to easily get back to the beginning of the next line. It's harder to read, like plain and simple. But the implementation of that doesn't necessarily always have to conform to exactly what was in the print world. We have to allow the device and the preference from the user a voice in there. And so there's that push and pull where I have to take the underlying thing about, that maybe came from print design, and apply that and understand how to apply it in a sensible way on screen. So like Grid is amazing. And that flexibility allows us to do interesting things. We are currently using it a little too much to behave like print. Like you say, why does the newspaper, when you look at it on a large desktop, why does it have a maximum width? Why aren't we using the whole screen and using Grid to actually lay the whole thing out differently? Like that might be really interesting, and I don't see anyone doing it. And yeah, I think the bigger the site, the more traffic, the more risk averse people are, and they don't want to embrace something really wild. And I'd love to see it. I mean, I think especially with like stuff meant to be read, getting this like broad view of things, and then be able to make this one bigger and read more of that, maybe even without reloading the page. But if you've got the screen, like, why don't we do stuff like that? I think it'd be super interesting.
I find it also. I'm completely dyslexic when it comes to typography. I'm really horrible at it, and I also never got into it. But I found this one years ago. There was this like image about it, and I was very proud of myself doing that. It basically is just like you can hover over the different things and click them, and it tells you what the name of it is. so at least you know the lingo of it. And I found that something, it's incredible how deep that goes and how many of these things are in there that I never bothered with. But the designers were happy that I built this, because they said, like, okay, here, somebody explains those things, and I just found a JPEG and turned it into a text and made it clickable. But I found it really interesting that these things there's so much depth into that we don't even look at. And I think it's because I came from a world where the internet was absolutely terrible and really slow, so I never ever bothered to actually go deep into, like, what could I do with fonts and with typography. But it does make a difference, doesn't it? Like, do you also see in e-commerce space that changing things in the typography had a difference in user behavior?
Um, it's interesting that you brought that up. The differences are, I think, not like in e-commerce. Um, Changing the typeface, I don't know that really has a huge impact on conversion. I actually don't think it does in most cases, if you're going from something reasonably well done to something else reasonably well done. Now, that's not to say that if the design is really pretty terrible and then you introduce a new font and some better typography, um, I'm not sure which one of those things made the difference, but you probably will have improvements in your metrics if things are easy to read. So if people are trying to compare products, if they're trying to make sure that they're understanding your pricing, like, all of those things need to be clear. But the size, the color, uh, if you actually are dyslexic, I mean, there's no perfect font for dyslexia, but there are characteristics about those typefaces that make it easier to read. If it's more differentiated between the B and the D, or the P and the Q, if the counters are a little bit more open, the little spaces inside the letters, if the terminals, the ends of the strokes are a little more open than closed, those things are the characteristics that make something more legible. So if you can make something more legible, you are likely to improve the conversion or the performance of whatever your website is supposed to do, for sure.
Hmm. Uh, I'm using this one, which actually is, again, being like super pragmatic about it. It's basically like a modern font stack, which basically gives you the fonts that are actually on the machine that you know for sure.
Mhm.
And I found this really interesting, to just give somebody like me, who actually is too bored to do it properly, just something to copy and paste and say, like, here is how not to shoot yourself in the foot. Do you think there is a need for more of these basic typography information pieces for people out there, or should people just do whatever they want?
Um, no, I think this stuff is great. I think good starting points. I mean, even let's face it, even when people started with Bootstrap, they were making something that was better than, like, not doing anything at all. Um, I mean, that's it's frameworks and things like that. That's where Inter came from as a typeface, and that has been incredibly successful. Um, and so these kind of default stacks that come in all these different frameworks are really helpful. And even just using something like this, so more quote unquote out of the box, that is going to list commonly installed things across a variety of devices, is more likely to get you a predictable result. What is with this idea of the web safe fonts, I mean, that's how people would refer to this collection of things that are always installed. um, it's more differentiated now than it was before in some ways, because you'll have one thing. Mac has unified it somewhat, because you have San Francisco on iOS as well as desktop, but that wasn't always true. It would be Helvetica or Helvetica Neue you would see more often on desktop, and then San Francisco on iOS, and then Roboto on Android, and something else or I guess Bondschrift maybe in Windows 10, I think. Um, so those are all different. They have very different metrics. They're going to fill space in different ways, and and your typography is going to be different. So that's actually where using these, but still putting one web font in front of it that was your choice, will give you more consistency in what you are designing across platforms. And that's going to be 25K at most. I mean, like, these resources are pretty small now. Variable fonts are bigger, but they let you do more. So that's really more of a, that's a personal design question for people. But your typical like Google font is going to be anywhere from 10 to 25K for an individual font file. So like that is acceptable. Like that, that keeps your performance. I mean, if you're, especially if you're using any of these frameworks, you're shipping way more JavaScript than that.
Yeah, and the interesting bit about is that flash of unstyled font thing. I mean, we had the flash of unstyled CSS way in the past. So basically, the page looked horrible, then CSS kicked in, and everything shifted around, and the button you already were on is somewhere else in the screen right now. And with fonts, you can do similar things. So there's always the discussion about, like, should you only use CSS for fonts, or should you actually use an API like Google's or any other font foundries that basically give you events and say, like, this is now finally loaded, so you now can replace the other bits, the sensible fallback that you had to show up front, so it's not too grating for people to see. And I see so many websites nowadays when I'm on trains or on bad connectivity that basically show me nothing until the font is loaded. Like, at least show me Times New Roman or whatever, like,
Yeah.
but at least make me read the thing until your 2 MB TTF loaded that you thought was good enough for the web.
Yeah, that flash of unstyled text, or FOUT, was the subject of the first article I ever wrote about web typography. And it was specifically about how to use a web font loader to get that class injected into the page so I could then do something different with the styling. What I did with that was style the fallback fonts. And so, what, with that flash of unstyled text, what people notice is things moving around. They're quite often not noticing the shape of the letters changing. It's because the button moved. It's because text wrapped differently. And like, those are the things that catch people's eye. And so whatever you can do to minimize that is good. And let's all say it loud together. This is a feature, not a bug. The web font is there to improve the experience, not prevent it from ever showing up. And people, I have no patience for people who say, well, we have to prevent that at all costs, so let's set display none, until the web font's loaded, and then we can show something on screen. Nope. No, the content has to come first. It's our job. And actually, you can apply a lot of the same tricks that, I mean, on my website, I wrote about it. There are lots of different ways to embrace it, but you used to have to use a bit of JavaScript to know whether or not the web font had loaded. And so you'd use from Bromstein, his web font loader library, or one of these other things, and it would get it to put that class in the page so that you could hook into, with CSS, how do you style it when the web font is not there. Now you can actually put some of that fallback styling right in your @font face rules. So you can have the @font face rule that loads the web font, and then have another one that is actually specifying a local source for San Francisco or Roboto or something else, and tweak the font size and tweak the some characteristics of how the font renders. Font size adjust. There's a couple other things that you can do that will make that fallback font that's going to display before the web font does more closely match the metrics and typesetting of what you expect when that web font does show up. And there's a couple interesting tools out there that will help you calculate these adjustments to put in your @font face rules, so that you don't need the JavaScript anymore. And that's really remarkable, how much we can do with how much is improved in the CSS support for this stuff.
Yeah, and media queries as well. You can do a lot of stuff with that. Like the interactivity of CSS in itself I mean, some of the new functionality and some of the new features look like JavaScript by now. Like we got functions in CSS now, and it's getting more complex, which then makes me, of course, wonder, seeing that 99% of the cool kids on the internet use Tailwind and other systems that never get this functionality of CSS. It seems like that there is going to be a 1 or 2 year delay before it actually, the mainstream that is created like really quickly will be able to use these features.
That may be true. I mean, if all you know about CSS is, how to install Tailwind, then no, you got to read the spec. I mean, that's where the magic is. I mean, if you want, if you're interested in something like, in my talk, I used a couple of things to help the slides look nicer. Let's see, there we go. So if you just advance the slide, just a couple till we get to one of the quotes on the page. So this is a good example here. In Safari, we get hanging punctuation, meaning the text is all aligned to the left, and then those quotation marks kind of hang out in the margin. The spec is there. It's just unevenly supported. But we can put it in with one line of CSS, and I get something that looks way better. The other thing that you'll notice if you go through this is of using text wrap pretty. And that's another nice little gem that is starting to ship, and Google's got it, and Apple has implemented it, and others. And what that does is help balance the length of the lines of text in there, so the line lengths look more even. And in this case, it's only a couple of lines, so it's not really doing that much, but it means that we don't have to go and use all these weird JavaScript libraries to avoid one word on a line at the end of a paragraph. So that one, like that wrap text on the second line of that paragraph under web line layout since 1991, it would kind of fix that a little bit. And typographically, those are the things that we want to avoid, because they just look awkward and they make these like weird gaps between the text. So what it does is it balances things out by shortening the lines above to bump a couple words down onto that next line, and it looks more balanced. And those are things like, that's a little technique from print that used to take a whole lot of fiddling, or automatically putting a non-breaking space between the last two words of every paragraph. Like little things like that are the tricks that we would use to try and improve the readability of text. And having those things in there and being able to do it with one line of CSS, that's pretty incredible. That just replaced a ton of JavaScript and a ton of time that it takes when it's rendering. So it speeds everything up. It's great.
Also, performance-wise, if the browser does it naturally with CSS, it does it before the rendering rather than me intercepting it in JavaScript and then doing clever things with it.
Exactly.
It's also interesting that when hyphenation in CSS, like auto hyphenation, Firefox was the one that actually spearheaded that, I think. But the thing there was that it's then connected to the language of the text as well. So that's something that is that makes it really fascinating. That out of a sudden in CSS you have to know the language to hyphenate it properly and make these things happen. And it's interesting that Safari is spearheading a lot of these things, because I mean, developers, especially like cool React kids, are basically seeing Safari as the new IE that doesn't do the support of the things that we want to do. But when it comes to typography, it seems like Safari is in the lead.
They have been often, actually, when it comes to the typography stuff. They So with the introduction of variable fonts in 2016, it was an Apple engineer, Miles Maxfield, who put a beta of Safari in my hands 3 weeks after that introduction, and I was able to show it on stage. And that was something that was magical. And that's where the support was best. And so each each browser vendor tends to, like, there'll be an area that they just tend to always be ahead in. And I'm grateful that, it's often been Firefox. Sometimes it's Safari. Sometimes it's Chrome. Um, but when they come together, they make some pretty great experiences. Um, and it is that competition that is so necessary, because they can't focus on everything all at once. They need to focus on the things that they believe are important to their users. And so the design community, it's on the Mac. The design community, like the print design community, is increasingly not spending the time adding other browsers. So um, Safari is what's there, and so they spend their time improving the experience there, and that's great. Um, what people do need to remember is that we have to use these things, or the browser vendors never support them. So, like, I add those things into my site to make use of these features, and I know that if someone looks at it on their phone, or if they look at it on their Mac and they haven't changed the default, then they will get that hanging punctuation and it'll look pretty. It'll look really nice. Not everybody else will get that, but if they don't, like, the browser vendors check, they do their own research. They scan the websites and look for the use of features. And if these features never get used, then the support goes away. And so something like hanging punctuation or hyphenation is a great example. If you read the spec, the support for it is there in the specification for CSS. It's incredibly detailed, and we just haven't had the collective will to get the best way of handling that hyphenation built into these browsers. And some of it is open source. Like, we could do this, but you brought up it being language specific, but that's not the only stuff in CSS that's language specific. I mean, we can lay text out left to right. We can lay it out right to left. We can lay it out top to bottom, right to left. And those are all things that are controlled in combination with declaring the language in the document, which is what we're supposed to do. So then CSS can do something useful with it. And um, and so hyphenation, I think, is, it's no different. Like, it may use this character set to be in English or in German, but they are completely different hyphenation rules. And so, yeah, the browsers do need to support it better, and we need to write our documents correctly so that we can help the browser do its job.
It's interesting to see CSS is embracing this whole idea. I mean, I did a few right-to-left websites in the past in Hebrew and Arabic, and I was lucky to have worked on government websites where this was a necessity, and most developers would never understand it. So we're going away when it comes to padding and margin from the top left, right bottom,
Right.
to actually going for block and going for flow, rather than, because it's not left and right. It could be completely opposite of it.
Right.
And I think that's an interesting thing in CSS as well, that CSS embraces the squishiness of the internet and the needs of the end user much more than more rigid environments. Like I remember like doing like GTK or things like that on like desktop apps. CSS has always been off the web and for the web, but people, if they don't use the features, browser makers don't have time to do it. I worked for 2 browser makers, and I know we're not 6,000 developers that sit around twiddling their thumbs, hoping that somebody will use a feature. If it's not used, it's not going to get any resources. That's like any other software development out there.
Yeah.
So by having it and by starting to use it, we can actually make a point to our managers and say like, hey, we should implement that now because so many people are relying on it. But it's hard with typography because they don't rely on it. A lot of it is like a progressive enhancement of beautifying the thing.
Yeah.
It works without it, but it's nicer with it. Like, I mean, you could talk to me about hanging punctuation. I don't know what the hell you do. I probably wouldn't see the difference if I looked at it. But that's just me, I guess.
I think that is it is the thing that I love about typography, but it is also the thing that can be most frustrating. 90% of what we put on the screen is text. I mean, unless you're working on a photographer's blog, even when it's an e-commerce site, yes, there are product photos, and that's what people look at a lot, but they also want to know what the ingredients are. They want to know how much it costs, and like all of these things are made okay or made really great with typography. So using when you've got multiple prices, if you use tabular numbers instead of the proportional ones, the digits line up. And that's
Yep.
just a format that's in the font. Like we can specify that with CSS. If we want to superscript the cents after the dollars to sort of reduce their prominence, but not make them go away, that is an HTML tag. And we can style it with CSS. And so like so many of these things are there. And it's those details that really help set it apart and make it go from, yes, I can get the job done, to that was easy. I liked
Mm.
that. I had it felt frictionless for me to go through that experience, and now you've got someone who's going to come back, and there that's where the reason is. You had good design, good layout and architecture, but the typography is what took that last little bit of friction away and made it a joy to do instead of a chore.
I love that with Intel in JavaScript as well, that we have this module now that actually when you display numbers or you display prices, that you can actually define the locale and it will do it accordingly. Like in America, you do a comma after the 1000. In Europe, we don't. We put a decimal point in it. We put a comma as a decimal point. Americans do a decimal point in there. So the JavaScript would do the rendering for you, and then the styling would kick in with the right font, and it will be fine. You don't actually need to do that on the back end any longer. You don't need to do that. You can just get it in the browser itself, and that's quite amazing. But it brings me to an interesting point about dependency. Like, I mean, there was a discussion a long time ago about like if you should rely on Google Fonts for hosting. And in Europe, most of the time you can't because it's not GDPR compliant. So basically, you have to host them somewhere yourself as well. And which now brings me to a more problematic thing, which I want to talk about in the next edition of that one when I'm back from holiday, is what happens if Google is forced to sell Chrome now? Like, will all the Google font stuff, will all the great goodness that Google does for the web actually go away as well if they sell Google to OpenAI? Or, I mean, Yahoo offered to buy it. I didn't even know it existed any longer. So it's relying on like third parties is convenient, as you said, like you got the API, the JavaScript API to replace the fonts. But is it something that is getting more and more unreliable? Is it something that we should be telling people host as much as you can yourself?
Well, I think in general that's a better practice, to be honest. Google Fonts makes it really easy to pick fonts and add them to your site, but it also you still can download them from Google and host them yourself. And so, I think in as part of the deciding process, or if you are making a platform where you want the user to be able to customize their site, you're building a web flow, you're building whatever, like then using Google Fonts that way makes a lot of sense. But once you've decided and you're already hosting your other assets, then relying on a third place to go get these things is just going to slow things down. As fast as they are, every time I have dug into it, one of the bottlenecks that I find in performance is waiting for that third party script to go get stuff from Google, where I could simply take those files. They're all open source. It's totally legit. There's no licensing issue here. But I can put them on my own site, and that that DNS lookup has already been done. That those connections are warm already for the end user to be getting those assets. And if they're getting them all from one place, then it is just going to be faster, and they will have better caching with the browser from one screen to the next, because that request will never get made again. And so yeah, a tool like this is a great one. The Google Web Fonts Helper, I've used that so many times. Basically, be able to just grab the web ready files, and with open source files, where there is no licensing issue, I've actually had really good luck using Font Squirrel, which is a site I've never used to recommend, but you can upload the font files there and get them optimized for your use. And so you can be more certain that if I only need, what's generally referred to like a Latin 1 character set, so you can serve most Western European languages with that one file, is more compact than a complete one. So you don't need a 2 megabyte TTF file. You want the 25K WAF2 file. And that is going to be the difference in stripping out some of the stuff. If you don't need Cyrillic support for the language that you're writing in your site, then why serve that? And Google did a lot of that stuff on the fly, which is what is so helpful for a lot of people. But if you know your content and you know what your needs are, then you will have the best judgment about what should stay incorporated in that font file so you can get the best performance out of it.
It's interesting when you talked about it's free, it's okay to use. I love that the anti-piracy ad that was running before DVDs in the past and also on television used a pirated font. They found out now. So basically, the government ad that they actually said against online piracy used some random font, but there are so many dodgy font sites out there where you can download fonts that are actually pirated or bad copies of them, and they have a lot of like anti-patterns of like clicking on download buttons and having pop-ups and waiting for 20 seconds and then having a dodgy zip file that you don't know what else is in there. It seems like when it comes to font usage, people are just like more nonchalant about like stealing things from people. Have you done fonts yourself as well, or did you just have friends that are better at it?
I've never made a font. I would like to. I have some drawings, and actually,
Yeah.
the letters that type is set in there is a French typeface that I found in a book, but I've never found online, and I've started to redraw those letters. Um, that might be the first one. I'm not sure, but yeah, there are tons of sites out there where you can download just about anything. But what a lot of people forget about is even if you're buying it from Monotype, um, someone did the work to design it, and someone put a ton of time and effort into creating all of the lettering pairs and the spacing and doing all of this work, and it was a person and then maybe a company, but um, the licensing is there for a reason, because someone else put the effort in. And yes, there are tons of open source fonts, and uh, but if you really need to have this one particular brand font, then get a license. I mean, that's and then use the thing properly. It is a piece of software that somebody put a ton of time and effort into, and uh, there, either find something that's open that is going to work for you, or um, being able to go and uh, oh, from Mandy, great article. She's wonderful. Um, uh,
Yeah, I didn't
that
want to interrupt your please pay the people that you're using stuff for, but it's making sense. But I wanted to get a bit into that because we talked about like responsive design fonts, and that's great for like proper layouts. But I love just how creative you can get with like variable fonts and do like really random stuff like color fonts, and
mhm.
he does like all these little jokey things like a honk variable font where you could scream into a scream into a microphone. It gets bigger and smaller when you do it. And I think that's just really beautiful that this is part of this is not a canvas where you have to pixel things on in JavaScript,
Mm.
but it's all possible with like the font face itself. And this is just amazing when you think about it, but I don't see it used in the wild. I mean, people go crazy about like GSAP animations and these kind of things. Like you have like all the code pens out there where people get super creative. But it seems like the embracing color fonts and embracing variable fonts is not as much there as a competitive creativeness thing. Is it because the support was not there in other browsers than Safari or Firefox, or why do you think that is?
Um, well, first off, they're actually used a lot more than you realize. So quite often, what gets served by Google Fonts is actually a variable font. So they will. This was actually I had put this in a talk a couple years ago when they first started doing this. It was months before people found out that everybody using the typeface Oswald was
Oh,
having a variable version of it served,
okay.
and they had been doing this tens of millions of times, and they did it because that one optimized font file allowed them to have a regular weight, a bold weight, a semi bold in the middle, all in a single file. So for Google, it was an efficiency. They served less data because they could serve that one font file to satisfy all of these needs. They have since been doing that with many of their top serving font files. So they get used for performance reasons far more than a lot of people realize. To be expressive with it requires designers to get it, and that's where the tooling has improved. Variable font support in Figma is great. The UI is really good. Martian Wickery and the team there, like they just came out with one of the best experiences to work with variable fonts. The support's there and the Adobe tools as well. But what it requires, because these things then become really complex. You might have um, a weight range that goes from 100 to 900, and a width range that might go as narrow as 50% and as wide as 150%. You might have a Jello fill in it. You never know. And uh, that those things are all around optimizing text on screen for reading, but maybe not being super expressive with it. But then you have these like really interesting axes that people could build into the fonts that change the angle of the ends of the strokes or open up the counters more, extend the ascenders and descenders of like the lowercase and letters like above, like more above and below the baseline of the text. Those are all really interesting and super expressive things that you can animate, all of them, um, that yeah, we don't see as much because now we get into, does the designer understand the code behind this enough to even know they could do it in the first place? And the answer often is maybe no.
I mean, there's also these articles that I find where it's like do something, polish it with line height units, and sort these things out. RLH, 1LH, what the hell are all these things? It's I'm always like, okay, 1.5 line height makes it readable for most people, so that's probably a good thing. Not putting a unit behind is probably a good idea as well. You keep to have to catch up with these things. I remember when a list apart was still a big thing, and like the main thing where we looked at, there was the cicada rhythm articles about your typography, and there was all kind of like, here's the my favorite was always these random CSS things where it's like 0.56255653, and then in Safari it will be the right thing. That was kind of deterring people to take a look at it because it felt like clicky and like too hard to understand. But there are so many beautiful things in there. It
Yeah.
really frustrates me that I don't have the time and patience to look into it.
Well, that's the contents of my talks have evolved over the years because I used to have to include a lot of little hacks like that. So, you don't set the text to be um, perfectly uh, set horizontally, rotate it 1/10,000th of a degree because that kicked IE into a different rendering mode, and it would smooth the text. And without that, you end up with really jagged text, like early on in the
Hmm.
time of web fonts. And my book was full of dumb little hacks like that because those were the things that we had to do to get things to be legible. And how do you make all these things work and then have your website not blow up in IE6? Like, we had all of that stuff. Um, but then an awful lot of what I did over the years was try and come up with some sensible defaults for people. And yeah, it was just always really hard to get people to adopt. But that's why I sort of gave up on that and just went back to writing those articles like on my website, everything under tips. Like that was about 50 issues of a typography newsletter, each one focused on one thing. So just styling your links better. Like here, there's one, if you're going to read one thing, go here, look at the code sample, see, what's the history behind this. And here's what you can do. Line heights and line height units, what is, there's often a paragraph break you would set to be often 1 em, or you're setting it to be the same equivalent to the font size, and that adds the font size gap plus whatever line height you set on that. And so it tends to space things out a lot. And the knee-jerk reaction for most people is, oh, well, that looks like too much space, so I'll do 1/2 em. Like, this is not that hard. And so I don't know, I haven't spent a ton of time with line height units, but what that does is allow you to specify the spacing not on the font size, but the distance between the lines of text. And that would preserve the vertical rhythm of the page a little bit more.
I remember
Was this necessary? Maybe. I think it is going to provide a nice nuance to it, but I don't know. I don't know. I think I'd rather get better hyphenation support, honestly, but that's just me.
I remember when people, as you said, like use drop shadows and invisible drop shadows, transparent ones, just to kick the other rendering mode in. And then scrolling became really jagged and laggy because like drop shadows are really hard to do. Like they're
Yeah.
massive calculation on the rendering. And it's just like people are just like on a fast Mac, they're like, oh, let's do that. And back then on a Windows machine, I was like, holy crap, I can't scroll the page because somebody wanted the heading to look smooth. And these were the insights that were interesting. It was with fluid typography was a thing as well that people were discussing about. Like that was Miriam Suzanne, I think, here. Yeah, and then other people were just like, I'm still using that, like I'm not using clamp. I'm still using that 1VW multiplied by so and so many pixels. That old trick. But yeah, it feels like you're always chasing the outliers with that one. Like, what if I make it too big and then I can't read it? And clamp can also slow things down a lot if you do it wrongly. And it was interesting that she wrote that one, and then basically other people were saying were talking against it in defense of fluid typography. Do you think that should be something that the font does for you, or is it something that we should be doing with JavaScript and clamp and clever things?
I don't think it can be in the font because the decisions you're making about font size and line height. We're going to talk about two different things for a sec. One is in typography for reading, where you want the text to be a readable chunk of information for your reader. There are minimums and maximums that you probably want to embrace, and clamp is really useful for that. So what clamp is all about is sorry, I just want to make sure that I keep this from notifications bombing in. Clamp allows you to say, this is the smallest I want it to be, and then this is the biggest I want it to be. And now here's how I'm going to get it to scale in between. And we've done this in a bunch of different ways. We did it with media queries, and we set it this size when the screen size is here, and then this size when it's here, and the size when it's here. And so it was just in steps that we would do. And that was the first technique that I wrote about in my book. That was my definition of, or how I implemented responsive typography. But then we got into all of these different ways. Tim Brown had this technique called CSS locks that I used that was essentially creating something that simulated what clamp now does with one nice little line of CSS without a lot of weird math. So that typography for reading probably doesn't need to scale much. And so we're talking about going from maybe an equivalent of 16 pixels, maybe 15 at the smallest, to maybe 20. I mean, it's a small range. And so there's not really a lot that we're trying to do there. The other kind of typography, though, the typography that you want for attention, that for things to get noticed, that might scale a lot more. And you might have a different approach for that. and then, it's just choosing the right technique, but the right place to do it is in CSS. That's going to process the fastest. It's going to do what you need it to do, and it's going to do it with the least impact on scroll performance. Because like you do one of two things: you're going to be adjusting the width of your window, maybe, and then you're going to be scrolling. You are not doing those two things at once, unless you are you're way more adept at it than I am. But people adjust the browser size when they need to get something out of the way. Usually that's you're just gonna, oh, I want to make this narrower so I can see this thing over here. I have notes on the left. I want to show some stuff on the right. And that's where the rendering performance would come in it having to change the size based on what's available. Whereas usually it's just, what are you scrolling? And then you don't want to drop shadow. Like we want the CSS to do the things the CSS is supposed to do and not get in the way of that experience. So I think it belongs in CSS, not JavaScript, not in the font.
I remember one of my articles on A List Apart back then, together with Lawrence Carvalho, when I worked at Yahoo, was how to detect font size changes, that people do a Command plus to change the font size because there was no event for that. So the dirtiest trick was put an iframe in the page that's 1em by 1em, because an iframe has a resize event handler, and that would automatically fire. And then we also did that with a hidden div with like 1em by 1em and read out the size of it. This control is driving me crazy that people keep wanting that. I remember when Internet Explorer didn't resize font sizes, the fonts that were defined in pixels. And then people did these widgets on their page to make the font bigger and smaller for accessibility reasons. And they didn't even use buttons, so you couldn't reach those things with a keyboard.
Right.
So they were just like accessibility features that were just there because somebody thought they can find a clever solution that the browser should do for you. The web is full of these clutter things. Now it's dark and light mode switches, which also come from the operating system, and people put them in their page again. I think in 3 years' time, we're going to laugh at them and say, like, what did you do?
Yeah, the font size stuff, like that goes like right back to the beginning of what we were talking about. We have to let the user make that choice. Our design has to be better so it doesn't fall apart. Anytime we start getting into trying to exert control over what the user is going to do, it will fail. It will backfire, and it's going to do exactly the opposite of what we really want. But at the root of it is the vanity of the developer, the designer is doing the work in the first place. 100%. That's, it's on the part of the owner of that site, the creator of it, not wanting to to allow it to exist in a way that doesn't look like what they signed off on, what they designed, what they approved, whatever that is. And it's BS. Like it's terrible, and it has no business in the user experience whatsoever. We have to use the tools that we have, the CSS tools that allow us to have our layout reflow. If somebody zooms the text, one of the things that the reason why we would set our media queries in ems is it's related back to the size of the text. So if you zoom the text, we trigger the media query and we reflow the design to be more appropriate to what is effectively turning the desktop into your phone. I mean, that's and that's the simplest way actually for us to think about it. So, we turn it into a one column layout and that happens simply because somebody zoomed, and that's what triggered the media queries. All of that tied back to the size of the text itself. And so when we do that, then the design adapts to what the user's asking for, and we're then giving them something that's going to be far more useful.
Yeah, it goes back to Flexbox as well, and Grid that actually does these things automatically for you. It's not like a table layout that actually would expect to be multiple column. If it's not enough space, it just floats the things around where you want them to be. Which, of course, with the CSS masonry layouts, we have a reading order issue with accessibility we need to fix right now, because that might be a thing that you can do too much. I just looked up quickly. I remember when CSS books, when I bought them and stuff, CSS Mastery by by Cameron Moll, I think was one of my favorite because it did all these things. There was lots of, back in the days, there were lots of CSS tools. Here's how to do that perfect rounded button that's 500 pixels wide. But all his stuff was like, here's how to fit a word from here to here into that button and still looks okay. So that's where I always think CSS mastery to me came in, like embracing the flexibility of the input that comes from the CMS or from the end user's needs. And I love that CSS is going more and more into that space to be like reactive to the needs of the user rather than just like an easier way to do table layouts.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And it is that it's the CMS world that really brings that to the fore, where you have to design for something where you don't know the content, and it's going to change, from day to day. And I love that. I mean, I think that's a fascinating challenge because that's where the system comes into play. And being able to do things, to balance the wrapping of headlines that you don't know the length, to set the punctuation the way you want, the hyphenation the way you want, because you don't know if it's going to be a 3-paragraph story or 10. All of those things are completely dynamic, and it's a great way to sort of stress test the typography that you're trying to create to see if it's really going to hold up.
I love that also when it comes to like basically I found this typography manual some time ago, which I found quite interesting to read by Mike May. You probably have heard of that as well. Where basically just simple tricks, like use one font, do traditional font sizes, don't get too clever about it, redefine for CJ characters and so on and so forth. So if there's one thing that you would love to people to embrace more, like what would be the thing where you say like, please stop doing that and just like if we embrace that, the whole world of typography will be nicer and I don't cringe in front of your screen. What do people do that they shouldn't be doing?
Don't use Helvetica.
Oh well. So Arial, right?
Honestly, from a legibility standpoint, Arial's a little better.
Oh wow.
I think it is about type choice, because you have something like this that you have up on the screen, and or there's a whole bunch of other things like that. If you dig into my site, you look at Miriam Suzanne's, whatever. Then I think there's lots of options out there, and you apply those principles, but the typeface is the voice of your words, and so that deserves some thought. And so I crack a joke about Helvetica, but the reason I say that is, one, I don't think it's the most legible at small sizes, so I do think that there's some issues there, but it also doesn't bring any voice. And so if you don't want to impart any emotion or anything about that in your design, okay. But I always believe that is one of the easiest tools that we have in our toolbox to say, I want this to be warmer, I want it to be friendlier, I want it to be authoritative, whatever that is. You can amplify that with the choice you make in the typeface, and then you follow all these rules, and it will be a nice readable experience. But we shipped a completely new typography in our apps last week, and that was to move over to our brand typeface because we knew it had the characteristics that would make our whole experience feel warmer, and that's really important. So it's not something that's conscious really on the part for our customers, but it will subtly remind them more of all of our advertising, of all of our marketing, of the tone that we try and set with that. And so it does matter. And all the other rules are the same. The spacing, the line height, the way you treat links, the way you treat all these other things that are in this sort of article. That doesn't change with the typeface. What changes with the typeface is the feeling that someone will get interacting with your site.
Cool. Well, I mean, it's fonts, so it's all about family, right?
There you go.
There we go. Thank you so
We
much.
didn't have one of those creep in for a while. So.
Yeah. Thank you so much. This was great. We're far over time, but I think every time we meet, we just go from one point to another, and it's always exciting. So it's good to see. So this was Jason and me, both two of the Adam Savage lookalikes for today. You're off to cycle tomorrow with the organizer of the event that we were at. So
yep. We're gonna go on a. I think it's gonna be about 160K total from here. I'm looking forward to it. That's the kind of crazy thing that sounds like a good time to me.
So you get some cornflakes first. Okay, no, that's not. That's
Well,
not
yeah. I mean, I have to carbo load there. So cornflakes is a good start.
Fair enough. Cool. Well, thanks again for this and for being on so short notice here. This was Jason Pamental. You saw the slides. We're going to send them around later on as well. Anything about responsive fonts on the web, he's your man. And the talk of, I think Mark will release the talk of the conference soon as well. So we're going to put that in the newsletter when it comes out. Thanks again for that. Enjoy Düsseldorf while you're here before you fly back. And
Thank you.
Greetings to Chewy.
Thanks. Really enjoyed being on. I appreciate it. Cheers.
See you soon. Bye-bye.